Hello and welcome to Behind the Stethoscope. This is Dr. Nurani, and I'm really pleased to have Dr. Trompetas, Dr. Alex Trompetas, join us today. Alex has been a GP for 20 plus years and a partner for more than 10 years. He is not just a partner at one practice, he's a partner at multiple practices, so that will give us a bit of an idea, I hope, today of what that might look like. But it's not just general practice partnership. You've done loads of other things around education. He is one of our GP trainers and tutors, and I know that you spend a lot of time with in education with medical students. He has also got quite a bit of management stuff under his belt, so clinical director of the PCN, various clinical lead roles, which I'm hoping we can discuss a bit further. Does that sound like an accurate summary, Alex? Is that fair?
It sounds like a very accurate summary. Yep, it sounds very good.
It's really hard, isn't it, to try and summarize 20
I
plus
know
years of general practice.
you hear your life being played back to you, and you think, "Oh, is that me?" Yes, but yes, that's pretty much what I do. Yeah.
Oh no, I feel like I've limited it a bit actually.
No,
Okay, I promise you a longer summary if we ever do this again.
that's plenty. That's plenty. Uh, Everything you say is true. I have tried to maintain a balance of doing some clinical work and then doing other things, management, teaching. Yeah, that's pretty much that. What drives me, motivates me most of the time.
Amazing. And I definitely want to touch a bit about that balance, because I think that's something we all struggle with in general practice, where it feels it's always intense and the balance is it's really hard to get quite right. But before we go to kind of current pressures of general practice, I really want to start back from the beginning. So you trained in Greece, is that right?
Yes, I went to medical school in Greece, and I was in fact on my way to Australia because half my family are there, and I had applied for something called family reunion scheme, and it was going to take a long time. I had to pass exams, so I thought I'll come to London, literally having just qualified and done house jobs, and get some experience with English and exams.
Okay.
And that happened. I left Greece in '85, and I think the rest is history. I came here, and I ended up at St George's, and I got jobs as a houseman, a senior house officer, and met my wife and got married in the UK and had children. So I'm still here after all these years. I still have family in Australia, so I'm not going to start in Australia like others. I should have done, if I had done that, I should have done it a long time ago. Um, so yes, I found it quite hard, in fact, when I first came. Um, and those days, the PLAB didn't exist. There was no professional linguistic assessment board requirement. And in fact, which is a little bit bizarre, because of the EU at the time, it was a completely open door. So
Yes.
You had full recognition, and I could be let loose and practice, provided it was within my competence. House jobs, senior house officers. The training wasn't that structured at the time, so I could just do that. And I remember in later years meeting junior colleagues that were, somebody was from Switzerland and somebody was from Sweden, and they were saying, yes, but we had to do exams, and surely we'll probably speak better English, and probably our academic institutions are better than the Greek ones. And I'll say, well, that's the way it was at the time. Anyway, I did find it quite hard, and I think it is very good that they now have programs, both for professional linguistic assessment and
Yes.
for integrating, particularly in general practice, integrating foreign graduates into the practice. And what was really hard, it was not so much the typical English, it was the insinuations of the language and the way that the non-educated lay people, particularly when they're unwell, how they use it, what they say, and trying to pick up the very subtle difference about what they're saying. People who might be in pain, might be in hospital bed. So that was quite hard. And the thing that was extremely hard is the whole system of social care and general practice, which are very different in different European countries. So this idea that you couldn't see a specialist unless you went to your GP first, the whole network of social care, how it was structured, because that supports the health treatments. I had to learn that as a young adult, as a new concept, and really internalize it and understand it. Um, I did not want to be a GP when I started. It was almost a shame at the time, particularly coming from Greece to become a general practitioner. It was a second-rate clinician. I wanted to be an oncologist. I spent a long time with the Royal Marsden. Ultimately, I could not pass my whole MRCP exam, and my wife suggested I start looking about a career in general practice. Um, did Adjusted my hospital jobs to include some gynecology, pediatrics, and then I presented myself as a trainee job, which those days, again, there was no structured scheme. You apply directly to the trainer. And really, I haven't moved very far. Most of my jobs in hospitals were at Croydon University Hospital, which was known as Mayday at the time. Yes. I went as far as the Royal Marsden, Epsom. I went to Westminster Hospital, which doesn't exist now. It was all local. St George's, obviously, I spent a long time there in the beginning. And then I was a trainee in Purley. And when I started as a trainee in general practice, that was a complete revelation. I actually realized that that was an amazing career, and this is really what I was made for all along. And I just couldn't believe that I was so prejudiced against this career. And I'm very grateful to my trainer at the time, who himself had diverse interests. He was on the editorial board of a health journal. He used to go to the LMC, and he infused me with that interest of not just being a good doctor and learning my trade, but be more aware of what was going on around me and how I could influence the health delivery and the care of the patients. If I waffle too much, just stop me. But this is where my career got kind of went into from early age to different channels, and I started developing all these things concurrently.
I think it's really interesting that because in some ways for me, and I'll use the term international medical graduates because that's what we use nowadays, but I suspect that's not even recognised in quite the same way it was 20 years ago as it is now. But I find it so interesting that you ended up going for general practice as the alternative, when I sometimes think of that as being one of the hardest career pathways for an IMG, for an international medical graduate, exactly for the reasons you said, for the linguistics in terms of the cultural connotations of when you're taking a history, and you in hospital maybe that is relevant, but it's never as relevant as it is in general practice, where you don't have any other diagnosis to rely on, and you don't have a team, and your history has to be so much more accurate and authentic. I almost feel like you took the hardest option.
I think you're completely right. But in mitigation, by the time I did the switch, I had already been in the UK for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. Because I did have a good go at hospital careers. I went through different jobs and exams, and I had done geriatrics or care of the elderly, and a lot of cancer. I did over a year at the Marsden. Sure. So I wasn't completely fresh and green, fresh off the boat, as it were, and green to the ways of. But it was still, you're absolutely right, it was still very difficult. Mm-hmm. And I do remember employing a lot of non-verbal tactics from early age. I found that a smile can, or an open attitude can sometimes help more than closed questions, and allow me, by hearing again and again what they were saying, and allow them to expand what they were saying, to understand much better what was going on. Another thing which is not to do with medicine, but I would advise every young person come from another country. I immersed myself in the UK from day one. I never had particularly Greek friends or went to ghetto areas or sought out Greek restaurants or any other cultural forms. So all my friends' children, my wife, everybody was speaking English. Once I
Mm.
had children, I started doing nighttime reading and rhymes and all that for the children for bedtime reading. And it's amazing how this um, widens your linguistic and cultural horizons. I never lost my accent because you come as an adult, it's very difficult. But I was able to understand, I was able to relate to people and what they were saying. I was able to write reasonably well because I used that later for my academic and management career. So you're right, general practice is the difficult choice in that. Um, and I just accepted all humiliations and accepted all errors, and I just went into it and kind of survived. And hopefully, the patient dealing with me got a reasonable service.
But survived, but also really it flourished by the sounds of it once you kind of got an appetite for what was out there. Because it sounds like you might have fallen into it a little bit, but then your training really made you reflect over whether, you know, it being the right place for you. Tell me a bit more about that bit of it.
So I always had a fascination about how things work, and as a result of this, right from the beginning, as a junior GP, I always stayed late and got involved with practically everything. I remember answering the phone as a trainee, just because I was in reception. I was answering the phone, listening to what the receptionists were saying. And I remember being fascinated about the different bits of software, how the prescriptions work, how the claims work, and spending hours talking to the practice manager in my training practice. And
Yeah.
those were different times, but it was just it was the process of that. And then when I joined as a junior partner, the practice, those days didn't have salary GPs, everybody became a partner, a
Yes.
local partner. When I joined, I immediately started questioning, not in a critical way, but just wanting
Mm.
to know why things were happening the way they were, why people had to put a prescription request in writing and not by phone, why were the surgeries open at certain times. Um, and one thing that I pride myself later is that no member of staff could pull the wool over my eyes because I had done most
Love
of the jobs and I knew how they worked. I had helped to unblock the loos, I had answered the phone, I had put on and off the alarm, arrived first, left last, I fixed printers, so I knew how they work. So if people said, "Oh, this is really difficult," I said, "Well, just do this or just do that." So I think that was the beginning of getting that beyond medicine interest. But my
Yeah.
first few years were very clinical. I just did full time GP visits, um, everything and anything. I was a junior partner, um, and I think it was later when I realized that becoming a trainer was a good thing. So I started with my training courses. Again, would be different at the time, and that started teaching me various techniques about listening, about working with teams and groups. I joined the LMC because I thought that there were interesting things discussed there, so I wanted to know what was going on. In actual fact, it was quite boring most of the time. But I did the LMC, I did the trainer, and I started befriending and chatting to people at it used to be called the health authority those days. I'm trying to understand how funding is allocated, how people improve their premises.
Mm.
So step by step by step, I was doing all these things. Um, I realized that premises are very important. So
Yeah.
quite early on, I instigated a move from a tiny premises in Selston, and I was lucky there were two semi-detached houses up for sale at the same time. So I managed to buy both of them, and that's where the original Selson Park medical practice started. Then later bought the houses on either side. We bought the entire front row, 6 houses, and converted slowly. I had to sell my vision to my partners. Many of them thought from early age that I was more business than doctor.
Okay.
Um, the current political uncertainties and new contracts and all that are not actually new. When I started GP, at the time was the famous new contract of 1990. That's a long time ago. And there
Mm.
were the same arguments how it's going to kill general practice and how the Secretary of State for Health doesn't understand. And I just thought there was an opportunity there, and that's what I did. So I grew the practice and I introduced new partners and trainees and so on. And then I started looking beyond that. I joined the London Deanery. We used to be called associate deans at the time, and
Yes.
then became directors. And my area of expertise was in the performance sector. I started working closely with the strategic health authorities and GMC, the National Assessment Agency. I was doing some freelance assessments as well. And that combined my interest in understanding how things work with the clinical knowledge.
Okay.
Um, so I was doing all that. I started working with neighboring practices about the idea of forming groups, doing maybe things like minor surgeries as a group. Um,
Okay.
and then, yeah, I'll stop here. I was going to ask, but I will go on.
I
But
have
yeah,
loads to ask. I'm
yeah,
literally
go on,
listening
go
to
on, go on.
this,
Yeah.
and I can just, I have this feeling, Alex, that your mind is moving so fast as you're kind of picking up these things. And I'm like, wow, okay, hold on. You said that in a sentence, but there's about 10 things here that you've done, which is insane. It's so impressive, actually. And I guess, yeah, in terms of picking up all these different things, I do feel like you you've kind of picked something and then moved on to the next thing. Did you ever in those times do you spend any time kind of reflecting and thinking, you know, was this the right thing? Should I be doing this? Because you almost strike me as a little bit of a risk taker, picking up, property, converting them, taking these big risks, which as medics we're not really risk takers, are we? We almost err on being very safe, and all of the ways we manage patients are more about avoiding risk rather than taking. It's so different from medicine in that sense. I don't know, what do you think?
No, you're absolutely right. I did most of these new ventures. I did question what I was doing. I'll give an example. When I went to work for the deanery, I realized that many of my colleagues, my more senior colleagues, had
Yeah.
more or less moved out of general practice, or some were in the process of moving out of general practice, and they were doing that almost as a full-time job. And I could see that was so easy to do. I went to one point of doing the equivalent of 2 days a week for the London Deanery.
Yes.
Um, and when you do that, you start having conflicts and questions about how do you also run the surgery, particularly if you have more than one buildings. How do you reconcile that with what your partners need you to do? And I think at times like this, the same as other times in my career, general practice always won. I always decided that ultimately my practice, the ability to improve the service of the patients were more important to me. And that's why some of these careers eventually I didn't take them further. I didn't
Yeah.
become one day the dean or the director. I don't know if I would have been able to, but I would have needed to put more time in it.
What
So I
pulled
always came
oh,
back to
sorry.
the practice.
What pulled you, Alex, back to general practice each time? What was it that kept you in the practice rather than going, actually, I'm happy to leave the partnership and go pursue these exciting opportunities elsewhere?
I have this passion for achieving things. I think if I was more able with my hands, I would have had a hobby like being a carpenter. Men often do this kind of thing, so fixing a car or something. I'm really not particularly good with that, but I have absolute passion about sorting out the practical things. And I found when I was moving into big organizations,
Yeah.
um, it was a different feeling. A lot was happening much more slowly by committee, and I'm not saying this in a critical way,
Yeah.
but it was a different way of doing things. And I was keen to do the small improvements, um, I don't know, making the records paperless if that's possible, or opening the doors of surgery half an hour earlier for commuters. This kind of small changes really enthused me,
Yeah.
and that's where I was able to do it more back in the surgery. Um, yeah, I think that is, when I look back, that is the main thing that always pulled me back. I
That's so
had a
interesting.
big, I had a big crossroads, Risha, when I don't know if you are aware, but I did an MBA at the London Business School.
Okay.
Now, the London Business School is possibly, or was at the time, I'm sure still is, the top business school in Europe, one of the
Yes.
five top in the USA. It was very hard to get in. I had to do a lot of assessments, which didn't perform the best, but good enough to get in. And that was a real eye opener because, first of all, made me feel very humble. I worked there very closely in small groups with really people that are now captains of industry, but even then they were well known and famous. I worked with people who either had big jobs in banks or in funds, or
Yes.
they had some big career in big companies, corporations. There was a lot of strong uh, element of risk calculation and finances. And I really struggled with some of the maths and some of the corporate finance.
Yes.
But I realized that actually first of all, there are a lot of very clever people out there. Sometimes we forget this as doctors. We're so groomed that we are in the top 3% of intelligence and so on. There are a lot of very clever people that can understand things very quickly, quicker than me. But I also realized that there is a system and method in this risk taking. And I'll give an example. One of the times I had to decide about buying more property and borrowing money, I used techniques that I learned there. I put together a decision tree. I did I worked out annuities, which I had just learned how to do it. I
Amazing.
took the different ways of how much income I get with the other, or what are the costs are, what are the likely the risks, what happens if interest rates change that much, or exactly like the banks will do. So what you say was risk taking, yes, it
Mm.
was, but when it's calculated, it's slightly less scary. So that answers what you
Yeah.
said
So
about
it's
it.
so actually it's not that different from general practice. What you're
No,
saying,
no,
isn't it?
it's like
Like you,
differential
it's a risk you
diagnostics.
know.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It's could it be this or could it be that? And what is the outcome in this and what is the outcome in that? Um, and when I finished my MBA, there was again a big pull to leave medicine. I was offered jobs in pharmaceutical companies, and
Yeah.
I'd done some consultancy, but I still came back. I still came back to run GP surgeries.
Yeah, and I understand that it's a much more responsive organization, and in a way, it's your baby, isn't it? It's your organization. You have this autonomy to be able to, with your partners, but be able to really influence that change, which is perhaps a bit harder in the bigger places in bigger
Yeah,
organizations. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But there is so much business in medicine. I mean, general practice, one of my biggest bugbears is we don't teach business skills to
no,
people who do general practice. And actually, so much of what we do and how we work, the skills that you'd need pretty much kind of what you're saying in terms of picking up skills when you did your MBA, you need similar skill sets when you're going into general practice, because it's a big part of it, isn't it?
it is. And some practical, simple things that are overlooked are the things that make you both a good doctor, but also a successful in the business field of medicine. So the trainees who are good with their portfolio and they finish it on time and they plan it and they organize it are likely to have these transferable skills in other parts of the day. They're
Yeah.
likely to write the minutes of the meeting when they said they would. They're likely to get back to you when they said they would. And these things matter so much. They're likely to pursue things, but they're also likely to finish the consultations on time. They're
Yeah.
likely to come to reasonable decisions about the treatment and so on. So it's not just, I mean, I dropped words earlier about doing annuities and doing financial decision risk, but actually just doing the basics is so important. And as you said, medicine, you can't get away from the business side now at all.
Yeah.
We are constantly sent expressions of interest in new enhanced services, and with each one of them, you have to decide how you're going to do it if you say yes, how much it's going to cost you, and are you going to achieve any improvement, or is it just doing it and running around like a lunatic?
Exactly, exactly. So we've got you here, who someone who actually finds they enjoy general practice, enjoy the clinical side, but actually you kind of have a natural affinity to the business side. You said your partners quite early on recognise that you have quite a savvy business, a way of perspective maybe, and it sounds to me like you're putting in 100% because you're doing one thing after the other, you're going into different organizations, you're picking up stuff. We talked about balance right at the beginning of this conversation. Was there balance? How did you find the balance between sort of professional and personal life in that period of your life?
I think it was hard a few years back when I had younger children, and I always wanted to do my bit. I wanted to be back a reasonable time. I want to read bedtime stories. I want to get involved in the baths, and also if if something was wrong with the children or the school ran, very often it was me who attended because I worked locally. There's some flexibility during practice. My wife worked in London or far away. So, but it was a lot more difficult, and I remember feeling tired a lot of the time. And I remember putting the children to bed and wanting nothing more than sitting in front of the television and empty my brain, but instead sitting down and doing an assignment for my MBA or and working till midnight and so on. I actually find it easier now. The Both my wife and I work full time, and we have plenty of holidays. But we're equally happy to say to each other, "Look, I've got to do this when I come home. I'm going to be busy for an hour,
Yeah.
and maybe the other person does the same." So I feel the balance works very well now. I also I also tend to be a great believer of doing using 20% of the time to do 80% of things, or whatever the expression is. But
I love
I'm
that.
not completely against cutting the odd corner, and I'm not going to spend hours making something perfect. Um, so I just want to, I have a list of things I want to do them and move on. Um, I think people suffer sometimes, particularly GPs, by wanting to give 100% or excellent service or do everything in the consultations, in everything they do. Um, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but that has helped me to keep saying I do exercise. Had a very big scare at the beginning of COVID. I was very ill, ended up in hospital on oxygen. Then I had 6 months out of work. I had a number of medical conditions arising from my COVID, including scarring in my lungs. But I have come back, and I now do regular exercise every day. I lift weights. I do all sorts of things, try to keep me healthy.
Yeah.
Um, but I found the boundaries between working and not working have blurred. So it's
Yeah.
something that I have to manage. I'll tell you a little anecdote. I
Mm.
now go to Greece in the summer. We have holiday there, and there's a lovely little cafe on a remote beach that we often go to spend days and days there. So a few years back, I persuaded them to put Wi-Fi. I told them it'd be really good for the business, but what I really wanted is to be able to sit there and do my messages and my emails. Well, I now find that when I go there, I actually can't get away, and I have taken Teams meetings from there, and they actually put really good Wi-Fi, really fast. So what was an improvement, and I thought I could be on holiday longer and do some things from there. Now means that you can never really get away. I'm sure I've done a PCN board meeting from that place, but maybe before you join the PCN. So yeah, it's everything's consequences. I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I would, yeah, yes, absolutely. And it sounds, I mean, it sounds like there is a lot of something intrinsic that really motivates you because, you talk about working on holiday, or you talk about, having your evenings where you'll pick up and do your MBA assignments. There, what is it, Alex, that motivates you to work that hard?
I don't know. I get really excited. I mean, if you were to come tomorrow and say to me, "Oh, would you like to join our practice?" I'll start thinking about. So that's not an invitation, by the way. I'll start thinking about it. I'll start looking at the practical issues, the problems. Nothing may happen, but I will feel that surge of adrenaline, that positivity, that wanting to look at that. And when you feel like this, well, I don't feel tired. I don't feel it's evening. I feel good. I feel positive, and that happens with so many things that and even now, and I know I'm towards the end of my career. I don't count it with months or years. I count it with things I want to do, and the legacy I want to leave behind me. What I'm going to leave my partners. What about this new building? I want to be finished. I want to be used.
Yeah.
What about this new center proposal? So I don't know exactly what motivates him, but this desire to, I suppose, leave a legacy behind as well.
Yeah, it's curiosity and legacy. So it's some of the same kind of principles you came into medicine with. You want to know how things work and I know how they, how they function and all of those things. That kind of has it for me. That seems like it's a theme that's kind of brought you all the way across because you're consistently curious. I'll try this out. I'll see what this looks like, um, and it sounds like that really is what makes it come alive for you. But it's and it made you come back because you said you were unwell, and you came back. And not everyone would necessarily think about doing that. And I just think that's really admirable. It's really interesting that your love of it made you come back after a period of quite unwell.
I did write my retirement plan while I was
Did you?
unwell, a bit like people do write their kind of future funeral plans. And because I thought, well, I'm not going to. So I wrote to all my partners to commit myself. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But once I started feeling better, and of course, they all hated it. The idea that I would stop doing some of the things that they subcontracted me, like the
Yeah.
disciplinary, the HR. Once I felt better, I found that all motivation coming back and that all love of my work in life. I still work at times as a junior doctor, like a junior doctor. We have a very important and good contract. We run an inpatient ward in a small community hospital in Caterham called Caterham D as a
Okay.
three-bedded ward. And when I go there, I'm like a junior doctor. I have to write discharge summaries and we do the ward rounds. And there's nobody below me for me to give instructions. I receive instructions from the matron or the sister. But I still love it. And while I'm doing it, I constantly think, how can this be improved? How can this discharge summary be written quicker and better so the GP who receives it gets some
Yeah.
meaningful information? How could we, well, also this, how could we do the ward round more efficiently? And this constant discussion, we've introduced now Ines on the ward and go around with a laptop instead of just writing the record. So it just have to be interested. I think if you're not interested and you
Yeah.
just counting the times and the number of people you're going to see, you are going to feel tired and you are going to feel worn out.
Yeah.
Um, and I was trying to motivate our salary GPs and our trainees to find things that are good amongst the routine and the, I don't know, the wear and tear, the emotional wear and tear of doing repetitive tasks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to find the thing that makes you tick. And it sounds like once you've got it, you can kind of run with it. I completely agree with that. And I think the other thing that's really makes me think or reflect while I'm listening to you is you have this really positive perspective on general practice and what it can do. Whereas if I just, you mentioned the LMC, but if you just, or you mentioned the fact that when you first started and the contract came out and it was all very much doom and gloom, and we recording this at a time where there's conversations about what a strike in general practice would look like, and it is really doom and gloom. How do you maintain that positive perspective in your life when it feels like general practice is kind of falling apart on the sides?
I think that's something that is not just for general practice, for general, how do you maintain positivity when things are wrong?
Yeah.
Um, I did a diploma in counseling in person-centered therapy, Carl Rogers, and I did as part of it. I had to do quite a few hours of doing having clients and also being under supervision myself. But I suppose I could draw back from that. But I think a more practical thing is I tried in the gloomiest times. I tried to think of myself of a few positive things, and I did that as a child. Um, when I was doing terrible in exams, when my parents were shouting, I was thinking, okay, but tomorrow I have a football match which I love, and I'm going to play midfield, and I'm going to do. So I would try to find little nuggets of things and focus on them, and then not repeatedly run in my brain all the bad things. And I think that's what I do now when people say, "Oh, they're gonna close us down. We're all going to be salaried in some sort of big impersonal health center." And I think, okay, but tomorrow I'm having this meeting with so and so. I'm going to go out and have a chat, and we're going to be so much fun. And oh, tomorrow they're going to install a new lift, and I can't wait for that new lift, and it's going to be shiny, and they're going to look at it, and I can see all the old ladies going the lift around the stairs. So I think people have to find their own um, uh, positive things to focus on, but there is a technique of doing that, of trying to dispel the doom and gloom. So I can only say that. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing I think of is, what do you think of the future of general practice? Do you think this partnership, do you think it's there to stay? What are your thoughts?
Okay, I'm not going to say anything earth-shattering here because a lot of more clever people than me have said this before, but it would seem to me, first of all, that uh, there aren't enough state-owned premises, so we have to continue out of existing premises, which are by and large owned not by the state. That immediately means that it's unlikely in the next 4 or 5 or 10 years these fears of all working in big health centres are likely to materialize. There isn't enough money to nationalize this, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's also unlikely because of the diversity of geography that GPs can just become salaried employees in few health centres spread around the country. So I think there will be practice all over the place. That immediately, in my mind, means that a lot of the existing structures of subcontractiness will stay. So I think a lot of the existing elements of general practice are probably going to stay, but there's going to be changes all the time. For example, the rise of salary GPs as a population, as a professional population, is all to do with legislation changes that were brought and funding changes that were brought a few years back. And it is possible that in the future uh, there may be more partners. Changes in funding and legislation do have an effect on the market. So, for example, you may be aware there's less work, everybody says less work for locums at the moment. People are going back and look at salary GP jobs, and a lot of partnerships trying to introduce more partners. I don't know where this process will go, but I think the future is not going to be very different from what is now. There's going to be a lot of IT used, clinical decision software. A lot is done online, like we're doing now, Teams and video consultations. But I still think there will be some kind of contracted, as opposed to salaried workforce doing general practice.
That's really interesting.
I used to run a locum agency
Okay.
when I was a hospital doctor. I don't put this in my biographical because I'm ashamed of it. So when I was an SHO, I discovered that I could get my friend to do locums, to take a small cut and do it cheaper than the big agencies. And I had an agency, and I call it Telemedic, and it flourished for years while I was working in the hospitals. And then some changes in legislation make it almost prohibitive for trusts to employ local agencies. They have to all go on the bank. That been overturned over the years, and now they still employ local agencies. And it did have an effect on all the local agencies, including mine. So legislation and changes do have an effect, but long term, I don't think it's going to be too bad for us as GPs, personally. Being eternally optimistic.
I like that, and I like to end on an optimistic note because it's important, isn't it? It's not just I can see what you're saying because we are influenced by the legislation, but you have this population of very smart, capable general practitioners, and that skill set is, as much as you've got the best AI or whatever it might be, it's hard to replicate that skill set or actually that responsibility, because so much responsibility ends up being on the burdens of GPs, don't they? And we are often the point where that's the end of the line, and we're making the call for so many things. Whereas that's not always the case for your technology necessarily. It will come with a caveat to say if the GP is happy and your other staff will want to escalate to their general practitioner. So I agree with you. We're influenced by the legislation and the ways and things, but actually there's always going to be that subset where we'll always need our GPs to some degree.
I can't say for 50 or 100 years, but I'm just talking about the next 5, 10 years. And the public loves us a little bit less at the moment. But again, that has been up and down over the last 20 or 30 years. And it might love us more again in the future. You go through phases.
Was there, because a lot of this is talking about, our ethos and our spirit and our passion for general practice. And for me, listening to you talk about the things you've done and what you've picked up, what you've decided to move into, what you've decided to change, all of those speak volumes in terms of the spirit of what a GP does beyond just the clinical side of things, and the love and passion for general practice. Was there, I'm just thinking of our budding trainees thinking about general practice and thinking about going into general practice. What would you tell them if you could look back and kind of give them, it sounds a bit cliched, but some nuggets of advice or some wisdom that you'd want to pass on to newer GPs? What would you say?
I know there's a wide range of portfolio activities that people can do, but I think I would advise young GPs to always try to find a happy place or surgery that they could have a more permanent link, even if it's a part-time link, and they can do all the other things, but they have this attachment to somewhere where they have colleagues, they have a supportive network, and where they could have choice in the future, because I'm aware that you can do less or you can do more, But I know some GPs are completely peripatetic. They have no base at all, and I do worry about them. They may have a wonderful life for 2 or 3 or 4 years, but what's going to happen beyond that?
Yes.
And they will be more vulnerable to legislation changes. So that's one advice I would give. Um, the other advice I would give to younger GPs is always try to understand the fabric of what's going on. Don't feel you're above certain jobs. Try to do everything. Try to understand the life of the receptionist, the secretary, the nurses, because then you will really own the knowledge. Whatever you do, whether you're locum, whether you work as an educator, you will understand what's that beast that's called general practice rather than just being a passenger. I think there's two things that I would suggest, and be optimistic. Always be optimistic. Things will always improve.
Absolutely. That's really sage advice, actually. That's really useful. Thank you, Alex. I think I've grilled you enough for today. And I just want to thank you again for being on the show, and for talking so candidly about your life and your challenges, and of course also the positives as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.